Welcome back to Bio 5. Today's new module is the urinary system. Learning outcomes for this topic are summarize the function of the urinary system, identify the organs of the urinary system, and state their function. Alright, let's get started. The urinary system is an organ system that plays a major role in maintaining the salt, the water, the pH, the homeostasis of the body. Excretion, or is the removal of metabolic waste from the body, and is performed by the formation and discharge of urine from our bodies. The breakdown of amino acids releases ammonia, which is very toxic. The liver takes ammonia, combines it with CO2 to produce urea, which becomes less harmful. Uremia is elevated levels of waste located in the blood. This can cause cardiac arrhythmias, vomiting, respiratory problems, and even potentially death. Creatinine results from the breakdown of creatine phosphate, an energy storage molecule in muscles. Uric acid from metabolic processing of nucleotides, DNA, RNA, is insoluble, and if too much is present in the blood, crystals form. Gout, as a result, forms, and this is a collection of uric acid crystals in the joints. Maintenance of water-salt balance. The kidneys regulate water-salt balance, which affects the blood volume and blood pressure. The kidneys maintain appropriate blood levels of sodium, potassium, bicarbonate, and calcium. By regulating concentrations of sodium and potassium in the blood, the kidneys can regulate blood pressure. The kidneys also maintain appropriate levels of ions such as bicarbonate HCO3- and calcium Ca2+. The kidneys can rid the body of a wide range of acidic and basic substances, so the kidneys have ultimate control over blood pH. It keeps it at a range of about 7.4. Secretion of hormones. The kidneys release renin, an enzyme that leads to aldosterone secretion. The kidneys also release another hormone called erythropoietin, EPO, which is a hormone that stimulates the production of red blood cells. Additional kidney functions include the kidneys' ability to reabsorb filter nutrients and also synthesize vitamin D. Vitamin D is a hormone that plays a very important role that promotes the calcium ion absorption inside our gut area. The urinary system consists of the kidneys, the ureters, the urinary bladder, and the urethra. The kidneys are paired organs located near small of the back on either side of the vertebral column. The kidneys produce urine. A renal artery enters into the depression in the concave side of the kidney, and a ureter exits to the kidney. The ureters conduct the urine from the kidney to the bladder. There's a peristaltic contraction that causes the urine to enter the bladder. Number 1, the kidneys produce urine. Number 2, the ureters transport urine. Number 3, the urinary bladder stores the urine. And number 4, the urethra passes urine to the outside. The urinary bladder stores urine until it's expelled from the body through the urethra. The bladder wall contains ruga, which makes it expandable. There are two sphincters where the urethra can exit the bladder. The internal sphincter is composed of smooth muscle and is involuntarily controlled. The external sphincter is composed of skeletal muscle that can be voluntarily controlled. When urinary bladder fills with urine, stretch receptors are activated, and these receptors send signals to the spinal cord. Subsequently, these motor neuron impulses from the spinal cord cause the urinary bladder to contract and the sphincters to relax. Therefore, urination is allowed. The brain too also has a control over the micturition reflex by controlling the external urethral sphincter. Here's a picture showing you the parasympathetic fibers that control the involuntary aspect of urinating, and the somatic nerve fibers that control the voluntary aspect of urinating. The urethra is a small tube that extends from the bladder to the external opening. The urethra has a different length in females than in males. In males, the urethra carries urine during urination and sperm during ejaculation. The prostate sometimes enlarges, restricting the flow of urine in the urethra. In females, the reproductive system and the urinary system are not connected. The next submodule is kidney structures. Learning outcomes are identify the structures of a kidney, identify the structures of a nephron, and state the function of each. Macroscopically, the kidneys are divided into the renal cortex, renal medulla, and renal pelvis. Microscopically, kidneys are contained in the nephrons, which filter the blood and produce urine. The renal cortex is the outer layer that dips down into the inner layer called the renal medulla. The renal medulla consists of a cone-shaped tissue mass called the renal pyramids. And the renal pelvis is a central space that is continuous with the ureter. You can see over here what a kidney looks like. Kidneys are composed of 1 million nephrons. The nephrons filter the blood and produce urine. Several nephrons empty urine into one collecting duct, and the collecting ducts drain into the renal pelvis. You can see the renal cortex, the renal pelvis, the ureter, and the renal pyramids. Each nephron has its own blood supply. The afferent arteriole approaches the glomerular capsule and divides to become the glomerulus, a capillary knot. The permeability of the glomerular capsule allows small molecules to enter the capsule from the glomerulus, and the efferent arteriole leaves the capsule and immediately branches into the peritubular capillaries. Blood pressure is higher in the glomerulus than anywhere else in the body because the efferent arteriole is narrower than the afferent arteriole. Then the blood goes into the venule that carries blood into the renal vein. You can see over here the picture of the glomerular capsule, the afferent arteriole, and the efferent arteriole. You can see these small little cells called podocytes that outline this filter system. The spaces between the podocytes and the glomerular capsule allow small molecules to enter from the glomerulus. Podocytes cover the glomerulus, allowing little pores. The cuboidal epithelial cells of the proximal convoluted tubule have many mitochondria and microvilli to carry out active transport, following passive transport, from the tubule to the blood. It also increases the surface area. You can see over here the lumen on the inside and the microvilli surrounding it. The loop of Nephron, also known as the loop of Henle, has a descending limb and ascending limb. Each has different permeabilities to water and solutes. The distal convoluted tubule's primary function is for ion exchange between the blood and the renal tubule. The distal convoluted tubule has several nephrons entering one collecting duct, which carries urine to the renal pelvis. The glomerular capsule and the convoluted tubules lie within the renal cortex. The loop of a nephron dips down into the renal medulla, and collecting ducts are also located in the renal medulla, and together they give the renal pyramids their striped appearance. Next submodule is urine formation. Learning outcomes are: summarize the 3 processes involved in the formation of urine, list the components of the glomerular filtrate, describe how tubular reabsorption processes nutrient and salt molecules, explain the substances removed from the body by tubular secretion. The 3 processes are glomerular filtration, tubular reabsorption, and tubular secretion. Glomerular filtration: small molecules, including water, waste, and nutrients, move from the glomerulus to the inside of the glomerular capsule. The afferent arteriole has a larger diameter than the efferent arteriole, resulting in an increase in glomerular blood pressure. This increase in blood pressure forces more fluid and molecules to leave the glomerulus than in a typical capillary. This fluid then is referred to as glomerular filtrate, which is urine. This process is called filtration because large molecules and formed elements are unable to pass through the capillary wall. So there are 2 portions: the filterable components and the non-filterable components. Here's a picture that shows you this glomerular filtration process. Water, urea, glucose, amino acids, uric acid, salts, they're able to pass through. Filterable components of the plasma include water, nitrogenous wastes, nutrients, and salts. Non-filterable components in plasma include the formed elements of blood cells and the plasma proteins. The non-filterable components leave the glomerulus by way of the afferent arteriole, and the filtrate has the same concentration of filterable components as plasma. Tubular reabsorption. During tubular reabsorption, nutrients and water move from the proximal convoluted tubule into the blood of the peritubular capillary network. Only these molecules recognized by carrier molecules are actively reabsorbed. Sodium is actively transported by one of 2 ways: a symport, which is coupled by the movement of larger solutes such as amino acids or glucose, or an antiport, moves sodium into the cell while transporting protons out of the cell. This also helps regulate the pH because the movement of protons, ions outward, reduces acidity of the blood. As sodium is being moved, chloride tends to follow passively. The reabsorption of salt NaCl increases the osmolarity of the blood compared with that of filtrate. Therefore, water moves passively from the tubule into the blood. About 65% of sodium is reabsorbed by the proximal convoluted tubule. This is a chart that shows you the reabsorption of the nephrons. In an average day, amount of filtered water is about 180 liters. The amount of water excreted is about 1.8 liters. So you reabsorb about 99% of it. The amount of sodium filtered is 630 grams, and the amount excreted of sodium is 3.2, 99.5%. Nutrients such as glucose and amino acids are reabsorbed at the proximal convoluted tubule. Glucose is normally reabsorbed completely. There is a plentiful supply of carrier proteins. Diabetes mellitus. Blood glucose is above normal and glucose appears in the urine. The glucose transporters are overwhelmed that they can't reabsorb all the glucose in the filtrate. So the presence of excess glucose in the filtrate raises its osmolarity. Frequent urination and increased thirst by people experiencing this with untreated diabetes is due to less water being reabsorbed from the filtrate into the blood. Tubular secretion. During tubular secretion, certain substances like hydrogen ions, creatinine, and penicillin can move from the blood into the distal convoluted tubule. In the end, urine contains substances that have been filtered but not reabsorbed, plus whatever is secreted. Urinalysis is a way to characterize normal urine. Normal urine has a color that's usually pale yellow. However, it may vary from colorless dilute to dark yellow concentrated urine. Abnormal findings in urine can include glucose, ketones, nitrates, nitrites, blood, and even white blood cells. The next module is in the kidneys and homeostasis. Learning outcomes are: summarize how the kidney maintains the water-salt balance of the body, state the purpose of ADH and aldosterone in homeostasis, explain how the kidneys assist in the maintenance of the pH levels of the blood. The kidneys play a major role in homeostasis, interacting with every other organ in the human body. Kidneys excrete waste molecules. The tubules of the kidneys remove waste, especially nitrogenous waste, from the body. The water-salt balance. Most of the water found inside the filtrate is reabsorbed into the blood before urine leaves the body. In times of kidney failure, urea is excreted by the sweat glands and forms uremic frost on the skin. Most water in the filtrate is reabsorbed into the blood, concentrating the urine. All parts of the nephron and the collecting duct participate in reabsorption of water. The reabsorption of salt always precedes a reabsorption of water, which occurs by osmosis. During the process of reabsorption, water passes through water channels within the plasma membrane called aquaporins. More than 99% of sodium filtered at the glomerulus is returned to the blood. The kidneys also excrete or reabsorb other ions such as potassium, bicarbonate H2O3-, magnesium Mg2+, as needed. 65% of water that is filtered into the glomerular capsule is reabsorbed back into the blood at the proximal convoluted tubule. First, sodium is actively reabsorbed, then chloride follows passively. And since these aquaporins are always open, water follows these ions. Hormones that regulate reabsorption of sodium and water in the DCT, distal convoluted tubule, include aldosterone, which is a hormone secreted by the adrenal gland that promotes the ion exchange at the DCT. Potassium ions are excreted, and sodium ions are reabsorbed back into the blood. The release of aldosterone is initiated by the kidneys. The Juxtaglomerular apparatus is where the efferent arteriole contacts the distal convoluted tubule, and it secretes renin when blood pressure falls. So when blood volume and therefore blood pressure falls too low for filtration to occur, the renin can be created. Renin is an enzyme that leads to secretion of aldosterone by the adrenal glands. Here is a picture that shows you the afferent arteriole touching the distal convoluted tubule. Antidiuretic hormone is produced by the hypothalamus and secreted by the posterior pituitary gland in response to low water intake. Atrial natriuretic hormone is secreted by the atrias of the heart when the cardiac cells are overstretched, promoting excretion of sodium ions, which causes water excretion. Antidiuretic hormone is produced by the hypothalamus and secreted by the posterior pituitary gland in response to low water intake. Water then follows the distal convoluted tubule and collecting duct into the blood. Atrial natriuretic peptide, or atrial natriuretic hormone, is secreted by the atrias of the heart when the cardiac cells are overstretched. This then promotes the opposite, excretion of sodium ions, which causes more water excretion. Therefore, natriuresis, which is excretion of sodium. Loop of nephron is made up of the descending limb and ascending limb. Salt NaCl passively diffuses out of the lower portion of the ascending limb, and the concentration of salt is greater in the direction of the inner medulla. Water leaves the descending limb along the entire length via the countercurrent mechanism because of the osmotic gradient within the medulla. The fluid within the descending limb encounters an increasing osmotic concentration of solute. The ascending limb does not reabsorb water because it lacks aquaporins. Its job is to help establish a solid concentration gradient. Water is returned back into the cardiovascular system when it is absorbed. So you can see on the ascending limb, sodium passes out, descending limb, water comes out. Water pulls out from the collecting duct as well. The collecting duct. Fluid within the collecting duct encounters the same osmotic gradient established by the ascending limb of the nephron. Therefore, water diffuses from the entire length of the collecting duct into the blood if ADH is present. Diuresis means increased amount of urine, and antidiuresis means decreased amount of urine. ADH increases water reabsorption, so blood volume and blood pressure rises. This then therefore decreases urine volume. If blood pressure is too low, exchange across tissue capillary walls cannot take place, nor can glomerular filtration. decreased sodium levels in the blood, that is, can occur due to prolonged heavy sweating, blood pressure falls and the renin-aldosterone sequence begins, then the kidneys increase sodium reabsorption, conserving as much as possible. Decreased levels of sodium in the blood can subsequently cause the osmolarity of the blood and the blood pressure to return to normal. A marathon runner should not drink too much water because pure water can dilute the body's remaining sodium, and this will then disrupt sodium-water balance. Sports drinks contain both sodium and water. They may also contain high calories and are not recommended for exercise lasting less than 90 minutes. When NaCl is absorbed from food, the sodium content from the blood increases above normal. This results in increased blood volume, which stretches the atria of the heart. The stretching of triggers in the ANH release by the heart, which inhibits sodium and water reabsorption. Blood volume then decreases because more sodium and water is being excreted out in the urine. Diuretics are chemicals that increase the flow of urine. Diuretic drugs are developed to counteract high blood pressure because they can decrease the absorption of sodium ions and therefore decrease water reabsorption, and therefore decrease volume and decrease blood pressure. That is, caffeine, for example, increases the rate of glomerular filtration and decreases tubular reabsorption of sodium. Normal pH of bodily fluids is between 7.35 to 7.45. If blood pressure rises above that, a person is said to have alkalosis. If blood pH decreases below that, a person is said to have acidosis. These are abnormal conditions that need medical attention. Ingested foods add basic or acidic substances to the blood. So does metabolism. The pH of body fluids is maintained via several mechanisms: the acid-base buffer system, the respiratory system, and the kidneys. The acid-base buffer system. A buffer is a chemical combination of chemicals that can take up excess hydrogen ions or hydroxide ions, and the pH of blood stays near 7.4 because the blood is buffered. One of the most important buffers in the blood is a combination of carbonic acid, H2CO3, and bicarbonate ions, HCO3-. When protons enter the blood, this reaction occurs. Protons plus bicarbonate creates carbonic acid. When hydroxide ion enters the blood, this reaction occurs. Hydroxide ions plus carbonic acid becomes bicarbonate in water. A blood buffer, however, can be overwhelmed. The next adjustment to keep the pH of the blood constant occurs in the lungs. So increasing the breathing rate can get rid of protons because the following reaction takes place in the pulmonary capillaries. The kidneys can get rid of a wide range of acidic and basic substances. The kidneys are slower acting than the buffer system and the respiratory system. They can reabsorb bicarbonate and excrete protons as needed. Ammonia, NH3, provides another means of buffering by removing hydrogen ions in urine. Protons plus NH3 becomes ammonium NH4 positive. Here's a picture that shows you the movement of bicarbonate with the proton, and proton can be bound to ammonia to become ammonium.